Hello, my name's Gavin, and this is Genre Books, and I've been diving into Project Gutenberg again. Over the past month or so, I've done a few of these videos where I trawl through Project Gutenberg and select 50 titles or authors which fit a certain genre, linked to, most often, a booktube event which is in progress. So in May, Horror Mayhem, 50 horror books. It was fairly easy to find 50 horror books. June on the Range, 50 Western books. It was slightly more difficult to find 50. The Summer of Sport is in full swing and will be until, I think, September. There's not an awful lot of old sports fiction, and for the non-fiction, a number of sets of rules or charters or histories of the sports would have been all that interesting. And it's difficult to find sports from the 18th and 19th centuries that don't involve killing something, to be quite honest. But we got there. Not linked to a booktube event, I also did 50 fantasy works, which I could find the works, but it was difficult sometimes in deciding about, is this too much mythology to be fantasy? There's plenty of mythology, but I don't want to just present that. And a lot of fantasy has come after the 1930s, so is not on Gutenberg. But 50 titles, writers, seems to be about right, without overloading anyone, without causing too much barrel scraping on my part. But now Rocket Summer is nearly upon us. It's coming in July. And for science fiction, my number one genre, I can't limit myself to 50. And Project Gutenberg makes this very easy. There is a lot here. We're going to come to one of the reasons why that's the case later in the list. But here are 100 titles and writers of science fiction freely available. And I'm going to start with science fiction before Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. I'll let other people have the arguments about exactly how science fiction these works are, but they get cited often enough, I think, to count. So to begin at the beginning, there is the true history of Lucian. There is Flying Off into Space, and that gets a pass into science fiction straight away. Micromegas by Voltaire is a work of satire, but a definite science fiction bent to it. He comes from another planet. He visits Jupiter and speaks to someone there before they both take a road trip to Earth. Something that's perhaps not satirical but broadly allegoric is Margaret Cavendish's The Blazing World. This is maybe the first instance of multiverse literature that you might read. This is from the mid-17th century. I think just after the Civil War, maybe just after the Restoration. Margaret Cavendish was the Duchess of Newcastle, and I think a woman quite ahead of her time. Sticking his big nose into business is Cyrano de Bergerac with his work A Voyage to the Moon, which, there is a voyage to the moon, does what it says, counts as science fiction in my book. And I'm not sure of the timings of these next two books, whether they're before Frankenstein or not. Not that it matters. But Lumen by Flammarion, Camille Flammarion. He was an astronomer who also wrote this piece of science fiction. And I suppose we can definitely include Kepler into that regard as well as an astronomer who wrote something which I think he thought was more scientific, but had to couch in terms of fiction in order to get it past the church or not find himself tied to a stake. If I could only remember what it was called, I think it's called Somnium. And a book with a very similar title, Symzonia, and that is by the given author name is Captain Adam Seaborn. I think there are hints and ideas and theories as to who the actual author was, but nothing has been proven definitive. But then we come to Mary Shelley, Frankenstein, pure science fiction, and for some people the starting point for science fiction. Just as important for science fiction is another of her novels, The Last Man, which is the first post-apocalyptic novel that I can think of. But to stay with some of the ladies here, we have Mary Corelli, A Romance of Two Worlds, the young Diana. She wrote more than just science fiction, but there are certain of her books which have a science fiction theme or background. Mrs. Jane Loudon, The Mummy. Well, it sounds like it should be a horror book, but The Mummy is a tale of the 22nd century. Like The Last Man, is set in something which is still our future. There is another post-apocalyptic vision in Theodore Savage by Cicely Hamilton. Another vision of the future, although perhaps not in quite such apocalyptic terms, is Looking Backward by Edward Bellamy, a certified classic of science gone astray in Robert Louis Stevenson's A Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Any number of works by Jules Verne. Similarly, another author with quite a few science fiction works, Arthur Conan Doyle, notably the Professor Challenger series, but also a number of short pieces. Back to the apocalypse again, we're going to keep coming back to the apocalypse, is After London by Richard Jeffries. There is The Purple Cloud by M.P. Shiel. There is J.J. Connington's Nordholt's Million, a book that was recently republished in the Radium Age series, as in fact was Theodore Savage by Cicely Hamilton. We don't know how the apocalypse happened in E.M. Forster's The Machine Stops, but we see what humanity has been reduced to, cosseted and unthinking in silos. Another writer, which so many of his works, science fiction, obviously H.G. Wells, is available on Project Gutenberg. So you have The War of the Worlds, you have The Time Machine, you have The Island of Dr. Moreau, you have plenty to choose from a science fiction perspective. And another writer with a few works that will come under science fiction, who possibly the name doesn't evoke science fiction when you first think of it, is Jack London. But you have The Iron Heel, The Scarlet Plague, The Star Rover, all available. Another name perhaps not synonymous with science fiction is Rudyard Kipling, but you have his work The Night Mail here, a book I've spoken about on more than one occasion on this channel, is The Hamptonshire Wonder by J.D. Beresford. Also someone I've spoken about is Edward Bulwer-Lytton, and his novel The Coming Race is available on Gutenberg. A work that I was wondering whether to include, but I'm going to stick it in for completeness sake, is Edwin Abbott's Flatland. I'm not entirely sure that this was ever meant as anything more than an aid to learning about mathematics, but it's a great little story. Future history is represented by The Invasion of 1910 by William Le Queux. This was, I believe, serialised in the Daily Mail, of all places, And 1910 looks to be a particularly dangerous year because there's also George Griffith's The World Peril of 1910. George Griffith also has The World Master, A Honeymoon in Space, and The Angel of the Revolution. George Allen England has Darkness and Dawn and The Flying Legion. There is Edward Shanks' The People of the Ruins. Philip Francis Nowlan, Armageddon 2419, and the sequel, The Air Lords of Han, introduce Buck Rogers to the world. And as we're moving into that Buck Rogers, Flash Gordon type of era, let's get ourselves to Mars. We have Edwin Lester Arnold's Gulliver of Mars, A Trip to Mars by Frank Aubrey, and Garrett Putnam Service's Edison's Conquest of Mars. Let's just mention Edgar Rice Burroughs whilst we're here. Not only got the Barsoom series, you've got quite a lot of the Pellucidar series. Tarzan dips his ape-man toe into some science fiction shenanigans at some point. I'm sure he goes on a voyage to the centre of the world. A very important figure in 20th century science fiction, but not someone who wrote a lot of science fiction, is Hugo Gernsback. But we do have his short novel here, Ralph R4C41+. Speaking of Ralph Milne Farley, The Radio Planet, Radio Beasts, The Radio Man. Gladiator by Philip Wiley. Science fiction and an early superhero story. M.E. Nor's The Sex Life of the Gods. Evgeny Zematin and the seminal Russian work We. Karel Čapek, RUR. Rossum's Universal Robots. The work that brings the word robot into the English language from the Czech. Space opera is now a thing. So we have E. Doc Smith. There is plenty of Lensman, Skylark, and other standalone works such as The Galaxy Primes available. The Rat Race by J. Franklin. 30-Day Wonder by Richard Wilson. Not that one. The Blue Star by Fletcher Pratt. I always love showing this cover. It's pretty groovy. Two classics of early pulp science fiction by A. Merritt, The Moonpool and The Metal Monster. And I think it's at this juncture that we're getting to the point where the eagle-eyed among you will recognise that some of these works are getting to be a little bit modern. I don't fully understand how copyright law in the US works, but although it is now a case of the work has to be 95 years old before it's public domain, there was at some point a cut-off, and a lot of people would have to re-register their works, and a lot of people didn't. Whether this is a publisher's oversight, whether this is lots of people who've been writing for the pulps who thought pointless even filling out the paperwork. By the time it takes me to fill this format, I'll have written another 2 stories. I've made myself $60. But there are a lot of science fiction works that are in the public domain almost as an administrative error. Let's take advantage of that. This Crowded Earth by Robert Bloch. Classic tale of the overpopulation of Earth. The Jewels of Apator and Captive of the Flame by Samuel R. Delany. Ignatius Donnelly's Caesar's Column. Andre Norton. Quite a few works available, but The Time Traders and Voodoo Planet would be good ones to pick out. Alternative History from Ward Moore with Bring the Jubilee, and also another of his works, Greener Than You Think. John Campbell Jr., another Titan editor from the 20th century, one who did more writing than Gernsback. So he has quite a few works available, but I would pick his trilogy of The Black Star Passes, Islands of Earth, and Invaders from the Infinite. And we're now into that classic pulp era for science fiction. Now there are lots of authors that are available on Gutenberg. I'm going to pick a few who, although they have a number of short stories there, also have novels available. So we have Address Centauri by F.L. Wallace, Worlds of the Imperium and A Trace of Memory by Keith Laumer, Star Surgeon by Alan E. Nourse, Empire by Clifford D. Simak, a rewriting of a John Campbell story, Final Blackout by L. Ron Hubbard, Legacy by James H. Smits, The Radium Pool by Ed Earl Repp, The Alien and The Year Stardust Fell by Raymond F. Jones, The Starman by Lee Brackett, George O. Smith, Venus Equilateral, The Fourth R, Highways in Hiding, Frank Belknap Long, Mars My Destination, H. Beam Piper, Little Fuzzy, The Cosmic Computer, Ray Cummings, The Girl in the Atom, and Death World by Harry Harrison, Murray Leinster, Space Tug and Space Platform, Fritz Leiber, The Big Time and the Green Millennium, Donald A. Wollheim, Secret of the Ninth Planet. Science fiction writers who may not have a novel on Gutenberg but are represented by one or a number of short stories that they wrote for the pulp magazines. You have Robert Sheckley, Stanley G. Weinbaum, Isaac Asimov, Ray Bradbury, Philip Jose Farmer, Lester Del Rey, Kurt Vonnegut, Philip K. Dick, Edmund Hamilton, Randall Garrett, Robert Silverberg, Lawrence M. Janifer, Harlan Ellison, Stephen Marlowe, C.M. Kornbluth, Frederick Pohl, Frank Herbert, Paul Anderson, Frederick Brown, Henry Kuttner, C.L. Moore, Raymond Z. Galloon, Donald E. Westlake, Mac Reynolds, Theodore Sturgeon, Jack Vance, Damon Knight, Jerome Bixby, Roger D. Aycock, Edgar Pangborn, August Derleth, August Budrus, and Evelyn E. Smith. I think that's your 100, and that's unfortunate because I never got a chance to mention Walter M. Miller Jr., Charles L. Fontenay, Chris Neville, Charles V. DeVette, Henry Slesar, Morrison Colliday, Manly Wade Wellman, William F. Nolan, Jesse F. Bohm, Meando Binder, Manly Bannister, Tom Leahy, Robert Abernathy, C.C. McCapp, Joseph Samuelson, Henry Haas, R.A. Lafferty, James Blish, Jack Williamson, R.R. Winterbottom, Alfred Bester, George H. Smith, not George O. Smith, Sam Merwin, and even Alan Arkin. Which is a shame. But until next time.